Well, we are going to start chapter 5 tonight. I did want to backtrack on something a little bit. In the last chapter, um, the author of Hebrews, or authors of Hebrews, um, were talking about the superiority of Jesus, essentially over the Levitical system, which again, chapter 5 is a continuation of that to some degree. Um, and then he likens the Word of God to Jesus, and he also likens the Word of God to the preaching of the gospel. And so when we think of the Word, we do think of the Bible, we think of the preaching of the gospel, we think of Jesus. And then the author makes the point that the Word of God is sharper than any two-edged sword. Able to penetrate, right into the very marrow, right into the very heart of the human. So we looked at that somewhat last week, remember? And what's really being described there is a dagger, okay? Back in the old days, everything was called a sword, okay? They had short swords, they had somewhat longer swords, but the metal was not that great back then, and so what they did is swords tended to be shorter as opposed to longer, and that made them a little bit stronger. Most swords, when we think of a sword, again, has a spine on the back, and that gives the sword its strength. So you use that when you're slashing, when you're in combat and you're slashing somebody, and especially if you're hitting a shield or you're hitting another sword, you need a strong weapon, or it'll either bend or it'll just break, So, but in the text, he's really referring to a dagger. He's making the point that it is sharper than any two-edged sword. And really what I was trying to get across is he's really talking about a two-sided and two-edged sword, okay? And that's a dagger, okay? And really there's, other than flint can be extremely sharp, and obsidian, I think, can be extremely sharp, but they're not practical. Really, there's nothing sharper than a steel dagger. Really, I mean, it's just the sharpest thing. And now this particular one right here, by the way, it's a really nice Spanish reproduction, by the way, of a nobleman's dagger. So this is, styled after a real dagger. It's a really high quality piece, but it's never been sharpened. Okay, it's never been sharpened, so you don't have to worry about cutting yourself. I mean, I wouldn't sit there and play with it or anything like that. And I'll let you all pass around and look at it. But if you'll notice, it's tapered, right, on the edge. Okay, that's where you'd sharpen one side. It's tapered also on the other side. That's where you'd sharpen it as well. So those are two sides, right? Then when you turn it over, you've got another tapered edge and another tapered edge. So actually, it is a four-edged, altogether, blade. And so this, if it were longer, it would be weak. It wouldn't hold up in a fight. Like if you're trying to slash somebody. So what is this made for? It's made for piercing. It's made for piercing. Nothing will pierce better than this if it were like sharpened up. And so that's what it's referring to. Okay, this is something that you're never going to use it as a utility knife. You'd never use it in the kitchen. You'd never use it for really. It's a weapon made to kill. Okay, that's what it's made for. So if you guys just want to take a look at it and pass it around, but yeah. So yeah, check it out. But we're gonna keep teaching nevertheless. So anyway, okay. So Hebrews chapter 5, Christ's superiority over the Levitical system. And as always, we're going to do some questions to get us thinking a little bit. I should have done the show and tell at the end. Yeah. Anyway.
Did you say something?
Yeah. Okay, so the Jewish high priest represented the people before God. And in so doing, he offered gifts and sacrifices for sin to God. So the first question is, what are some examples of gifts and sacrifices, and is there a difference between the two?
Did he carry blood behind the veil? The high priest?
Yes.
What was the question?
Yeah, again, the question is, though, what are some examples of gifts and sacrifices that would be offered to God by the high priest, and what are the difference between the two? Because the text mentions gifts and sacrifices.
Sacrifice for sin had to be an animal sacrifice.
So one might be an animal sacrifice, okay, and Nick mentioned blood, yeah. And what other kind of... Grain. Yeah. Yeah, there was a grain offering, there was a wine offering, there was different offerings. Yeah. Do y'all agree with that?
Bread and wine, right?
Yes. A dove? Yeah. Yeah, there were different kinds of offerings. So for the most part, usually if it's a blood offering, it has something to do with atonement for sin. That's the implication there. And then, of course, if it's a different kind of offering. So we'll talk more about that because that's actually not all scholars agree on that point. God the Father said to Jesus in our text, "You are my son, today I have become your father." What does that mean? Wasn't the Father always the Father? Or?
What was the context of that?
Well, I can't tell you everything. Yeah, well, the context is that Jesus made the high priest. Did everybody get a chance to check this out? Did y'all get a chance over there to check it out? Yeah? Okay. Isn't that cool? You like that? Yeah. Trelay and I have collected for years, and we picked this up from a guy who his partner made the swords, the high quality swords in Spain. And this guy in this part of the world was the one who actually sold the high quality reproductions to Hollywood to make all the movies. So if you go to all the old Hollywood movies with Errol Flynn and the old pirate movies, this was the guy who supplied them with the accurate representations. And so, anyway, okay. Okay, well, the context is, Jesus is now referred to as the high priest. He is superior over the Levitical system that was there previously. And so that's kind of the context. And so again, God then says, you are my son. Today I have become your father.
When did he say that?
Huh?
When did he say that?
Well, right here in our text that we're going to get into.
What period of his life?
That's a very, very good question because the writer is writing this to the Hebrews after Jesus has already been crucified. So that would be a good thing for someone to look up. Where's the reciprocal text to that, if you find one? Okay. Okay. Obviously, nobody knows the answer, so we'll keep going. Who is the perfect, ultimate, and eternal high priest? You sure about that? So Jesus. Most of you are saying Jesus. Okay, well, if that's true, then how can Jesus Christ be the high priest in the order of Melchizedek?
Kind of answer the both questions. When Jesus became man, then he was eligible to be a high priest. And that's the reason why. That's why he became God with his Father.
Right.
When he became man.
Yeah, actually, that's essentially correct. Everybody hear that? Okay. Paul said that when Jesus became man, he became the high priest. Technically, if you remember, if you keep it all in context, technically he was already the high priest, but now his priesthood is more fulfilled, it's more excellent, it's more noble, it's more perfect. Why? Because he became a man. And then so as a man, he was able to be tempted like we're tempted, right? He was able to suffer and ultimately die like we do. And so again, because he can relate to us now, he's become the more perfect and even better high priest. Bill, had your hand up? Oh, okay. Yes. You're going to find out.
Melchizedek is one that blessed Abraham on his way back from
Ex-
rescuing Lot.
exactly. Comes right out of Genesis where he blessed Abraham. That is correct. Yeah. In case you don't remember. But I know the word's familiar because you all are reading ahead of me. So when you get here, you've already read the text. Yes. Okay, now, if Jesus is the high priest in the order of Melchizedek, doesn't that contradict the doctrine of Christ's exceeding greatness? What is the word that we learned about? What is Christ's exceeding greatness? We've talked about it over and over and over and over. I'm going to begin transcendence. Transcendence. I am going to begin teaching as a, how do the monks do it? What is that called again? A chant? I will be chanting my teaching so you will learn it faster and better. No, anyway. Okay. Did that help at all? Okay. Take me a while to get the hang of it. Okay. Yeah, so the doctrine of Christ's exceeding greatness, that's his transcendence. I mean, you can't compare Jesus to nobody. He's so exceeding great. If you compared him to somebody, you're actually lowering him, right? You know, but we do read that he is of the order of Melchizedek. So, we're getting into a lot of mystery now, aren't we, for some of you? A lot of mystery. Should people be scolded for being slow learners? Why or why not?
I've been scolded all my life for being a slow learner.
Okay, I hear words and I hear laughter. Okay, over here I heard no.
No, she said good.
I said, as long as you're learning, if you're a little slow, it shouldn't be a problem. Just keep going. As long as you're learning.
Okay. You all are agreeing with that? Okay. You are?
Scolding doesn't help the learning process. No. It shuts it down.
Maybe scolding is the wrong word, but wasn't the writer of Hebrews over and over again telling them to not be like the Hebrews in the wilderness that didn't want to learn, that didn't try to learn? Okay.
Right, the Jews that were kind of on the edge of whether they were going to go back or go forward with Christianity too. So it's his wording might have been a little bit stronger because of their being on that edge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because he uses some strong wording in our text, and I don't want to, I don't want y'all to now freak out now. You might have to cover your ears if it's sensitive to some of you. Okay. We don't want to see people judged too harshly, do we? Because we don't want to be judged too harshly. So we tend to put a nice slant on things. But we need to still keep it biblical, right? Okay. Well, we'll check it out. We'll check it out. And remember, the purpose of these questions is to get you to think. Think about this stuff to get you on the right page. Were you formally discipled after your conversion? Or did you ever attend and complete a new believers or members class? So I heard one yes, and I heard some no's. If you attended a new believers or members class, or if you were formally discipled, move your head up and down like that. Okay, and if you were not, move your head like this. And if you don't even know, do the diagonal move. Okay. Yeah, when I was a young believer, the pastor came up to me one day and said, "Would you like to be discipled?" And I didn't even know what that meant. So I thought it sounded cool, because I heard about the disciples. I thought, hey, yeah, I'll do that, sure. So, and it was really one of the greatest things. I wouldn't be a pastor today if I wouldn't have been discipled. And I met with an older guy in the church. He was, an elder of the church. And we'd meet once a week. And sometimes I'd meet at his house, sometimes he'd meet at my house. And we would go through booklets. And we would study together. And you had to do homework. And you had to do stuff. You had to discuss things. And it's fantastic. Yeah. So this is discipleship too. It's just group discipleship as opposed to one-on-one. Okay.
Also depends on how old you were. I was 6 years old when I accepted Jesus. Nobody's going to take time to teach me.
But you didn't go to Sunday school?
Oh,
Yeah.
And my mother taught me, but it's,
Yeah.
when you say a new members class, that's just totally different to me than going to Sunday school.
Yeah. Now you may have been young. See, a lot of churches don't really teach. And now look at the situation that the church is in. So, yeah. So we do hear what a lot of churches should be doing. Okay. So we need to teach. And you know what? I don't think you're ever too young. It might take a little bit longer for kids, when they're little, but you're never too young to learn. In fact, I think you learn better when you're young. Yeah. Because when you get older, then you can't memorize stuff anymore. You have a much harder time doing stuff. Should every Christian aspire to be a teacher? Why or why not?
No, because we're not all teachers.
You need to define teacher.
You're not?
Yeah, because, we're teacher anytime we encourage one another or say tell people like a Bible verse or something, that's like teaching.
Right. So anytime we encourage someone, that's teaching. Anytime we share a Bible verse, or hey, maybe you need to bring your brother outside and give him a little lecture once in a while, or your sister, or maybe they're going to bring you outside and give you a little lecture, or
And you learn more being a teacher because you've got to know your stuff before you teach someone else.
yeah, definitely. You really do. And so, I think we're all teachers. If you have children, you're a teacher, Yeah, everything you do in life is teaching. Doesn't matter what it is. You are a teacher, but are you going to be a good teacher or are you going to be a bad teacher? Okay. And I think this is the last question. What's the difference between a theophany, a Christophany, and an epiphany? Now, I know Barbara knows.
Christophany is when Christ appears to somebody in a
Okay, do y'all hear that? Okay, so in the Old Testament, when the angel of the Lord appeared, many scholars believe that is a Christophany, a pre-incarnate manifestation of Jesus Christ in the Old Testament.
One that was a capital V, capital T.
Well, definitely the angel of the Lord. Like if it would say an angel of the Lord, no. But if it's the angel of the Lord, yeah, then that's because he always spoke with the authority of God. So we can debate, is it that the authoritative word of God was granted to this angel to speak in this way? Possibly. But then again, could it be a pre-incarnate physical manifestation of Jesus Christ in the Old Testament? Again, possibly yes. Well, Emmanuel is a prophecy. You know, the name Emmanuel means God with us. So that was prophetic of the coming of Christ, right? So that's not that wouldn't be a Christ. Now, if the angel of the Lord speaks with the authority of God, logically, if you're a Jew, you're not going to call it a Christophany. So what are you going to call it? You may call it a theophany, okay? Especially if you're from the western part of the world, you use the term theophany. And the term epiphany, I never used that term before until I learned it from Harry one night. He called it epiphany, and I had never heard that before, and I couldn't believe he knew something that I didn't know, But I was so happy about that, because I like learning stuff, so I had to look it up right away, and sure enough, that can mean other things too, but it's more indicative of a theophany, but used in the eastern part of the world, okay? So we jumped the gun there just a hair, but that's okay. Okay, so Hebrews 5, beginning in verse 1. Every high priest is selected from among men and is appointed to represent them in matters related to God, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. He is able to deal gently with those who are ignorant and are going astray, since he himself is subject to weakness. This is why he has to offer sacrifices for his own sins, as well as for the sins of the people. No one takes this honor upon himself. He must be called by God, just as Aaron was. So Christ also did not take upon himself the glory of becoming a high priest, but God said to him, "You are my son. Today I have become your father." Okay? So that's where that verse comes from. And again, so even though Jesus is the high priest, he didn't just assume that position, but by virtue, again, of everything he did, he earned that position, but now because he's a sympathetic high priest, he can understand the things that we go through, right? So the Jewish priests are actually called Cohens. I tried to mention that one evening, and the name went out of my head. I could not remember to save my life. Are Cohens, okay? If you ever hear somebody with the last name Cohen, well, they're of the high priestly line. I wouldn't bow to them necessarily, but
Don't they all have to be Aaron's descendants too? Because Zadok wasn't he?
Yeah. Well, I'll explain it here. Yeah. Yeah. So the Cohens, and again, they're called Cohens, and they are descendants of Zadok. That's correct. Zadok was the founder of the priesthood in Jerusalem when the first temple was built by Solomon. Okay? Now, Zadok was related to Aaron. And I want to be very careful. I don't want to say a direct descendant, but a relation, as I understand it. Because if you remember, Aaron's sons were not good guys. Was two of them. and they liked to party, and they offered strange fire to the Lord. In other words, they were not burning the incense correctly. Maybe the blend was wrong. Maybe they were doing other things. Maybe they were not taking it very seriously. But God said they offered him strange fire, and he struck him down dead. So this guy, Zadok, is of Aaron in a sense, but I'm not sure exactly the branches.
And Aaron had two more sons that were good, right?
Yeah, but then you also have Korah, which is also one of the branches that God eliminated for their sin. So, yeah. I want to be real careful, not that I tell you the wrong thing, okay? And again, this appointment was from God through Moses to Aaron, okay? So we call it the Aaronic priesthood, nevertheless. That's what we call it, the Aaronic. We don't call it the Zadokian priesthood. We call it the Aaronic priesthood. So technically, the Cohens were Levites, but the Levites are not necessarily Cohens, okay? That's why when Jesus is talking about the Jewish man that was traveling down to Jericho and he got robbed, remember that? He got beaten within an inch of his life. And he's laying there, and it said that a priest walked by and just kept on walking. And then a Levite walked by, and so there's a difference between the priest and the Levite, okay? And then, of course, who walked by? A Samaritan. And why didn't the priest and the Levite stop to help? Yeah, because the guy, he had already been robbed. Yeah, well, that's true, but still. Yeah, even Jesus said, even on the Sabbath, if your ox falls in a hole, don't you pull him out? You don't sit there and let people suffer, and even if they did touch a dying guy yeah, and defile themselves, they're only going to be defiled for like a week. So, yeah, and so, yeah. It's just a lousy excuse not to help somebody. Okay. So in verse 1, all the Cohens were of the same rank technically, okay? There's not one better than the other. Yet they would normally elect one to be the high priest, okay? So that's what that first verse is talking about, okay? The only exception to that was around the time of Jesus when a new administration in the Roman government deposed Annas as the high priest. They replaced him with his son-in-law, Caiaphas. However, behind the scenes, Annas really pulled the strings because the Jewish people really recognized him as the one that was voted in. And Caiaphas was installed by the Roman government. So behind the scenes, they really liked Annas more. But even so, the system was corrupt because this whole family purchased their control in the first place. So in other words, if you want to be voted in, you start giving bribes out, right? And they voted him in, and that's how that family got into power. So, just like today. Yeah. You're not supposed to say that. Okay. All right. Nevertheless, the high priest is supposed to serve as an instrument to bring God near to men and to bring men near to God. The high priest offered two basic types of gift to God. We have the animal sacrifice, which is generally for atonement for sin in some capacity. And then you have the inanimate sacrifice for the offering, usually of thanksgiving or something to that nature. Just like God accepted Abel's sacrifice, right? And he didn't accept Cain's sacrifice. Abel's was a blood sacrifice. Cain's was not. No, I think there's more to it than that, but
I don't think so. I think it was more of a matter of it was the first fruits.
Yeah. Yeah.
the first fruit of the animal, whereas
Right, because there's an implication there that he didn't give God his best,
white, which is the first fruit.
which means his heart was not in the right place. Yeah. So I mean, there's a couple different ways we can look at that. Yeah. So.
Like, then, the other question you had at the beginning was the gifts and sacrifices. So here it says two types of gifts are the sacrifices. Are they the same thing?
Okay. They're both called sacrifices, but again, one is usually animal, and that's for sin. The other sacrifice, I would say, is more of a gift offering. It's in thanksgiving to God. And let me see if I put it here or not. I don't know if I put it in here or not, but anyway, a lot of scholars don't view that as being separate. They view it as being the same. They believe that the reference is to any sacrifice or gift that deals with the atonement for sin. They view it all as a blood sacrifice one way or another, okay? And some scholars don't. In verse 2, the high priest was able to utilize gentle compassion when dealing with people. In other words, in proportion to their offense. So, let's say you accidentally knocked out somebody's eye. Okay, you could maybe be forgiven for that, or you could be punished. And what does the Old Testament say? An eye for an eye. Okay, now what if you accidentally knocked out the eye of the judge or the son of the judge? Now, he might be angry. He might be really angry because, you knocked out my kid's eye, and the other eye wasn't too good to begin with, So the judge has both that guy's eyes taken out. See, that would be extreme, okay? There's no mercy, there's no grace there, okay? So the punishment, to be fair, should be equal to that of the crime, not worse. You see what I'm saying? And in some cases, if it was an accident, again, maybe there could be forgiveness, okay? I mean, if you got busted for a sin, I mean, you're literally going to court. That's what the Sanhedrin was. It was the ruling body of the Jewish nation, right? And you'd go to court, and if you've been with me for very long, you know that any violation of the Ten Commandments, except for one, had what penalty? Death. Yeah, so technically, death is the penalty for sin. So you had to go to this court system. It was sometimes very elaborate. And you plead your case. Maybe you did it accidentally or so. So many people behave out of ignorance. And you'll see that in the text too. That would be more of an unintentional error. And then he also mentions, besides ignorance, he mentions going astray, which is more of a reference to blatant sin. And this is in contrast to open, defiant rebellion against God. The high priest should be sympathizing and or empathizing because he is also a human and subject to weakness. Interestingly, in traditional Judaism, if an individual deliberately committed a serious sin, okay, he did it on purpose, he knew he was doing it, and he did it anyway, there was no sacrifice that he could do, or multiple sacrifices. There was none available, okay, for forgiveness. I mean, the punishment was death. And so they didn't break a whole lot of laws back then. In verse 3, on account of this weakness, again, the weakness, the propensity to sin, he offers sacrifices for his own sin, because we're still talking about the human, right? The human high priest, and on behalf of the people. And you might say that it should say on behalf of the people, but when you translate that really from the Greek, it makes a special point of saying in behalf of the people. In behalf of the people. So I think there is a difference between in and on. Okay. You all taking notes? Okay. In verse 4, the writer of Hebrews begins to transition from the priesthood of man to the priesthood of Christ. The point being that no one just takes or assumes this honor or any other honor by themselves. Rather, it is bequeathed by someone more eminent than they are. For hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, to be a king, even if your daddy was the king and his daddy was the king and his daddy was the king, if you wanted to be the king, or for that matter, even the queen, right? Just because you inherit the position doesn't mean you're official yet. You're not official till you're ordained the king. And who's going to ordain you? Yeah, the high priest. And for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, that was the Pope, right? The Pope would ordain you, you know. And when Napoleon killed all the nobility off, you know, and you know the reign of terror, it chopped all their heads off and everything like that. You know, he wanted to be the emperor, but he didn't want to be ordained by the Pope because that would make the Pope greater than him. I like the way people think sometimes. I mean, he's a smart guy, obviously, very smart. So he's thinking, how can I have somebody greater than me ordain me and at the same time not show they're greater than me? And so at the ceremony when the Pope was going to place the crown on his head, he took it out of the Pope's hands and put it on his own head. And that right there, that single act changed world history right there. I mean, that was a big deal, okay? That was the beginning of the end, really, for the Catholic Church. Yeah. All right, where do we leave off here? Okay. So, for example, Aaron was called by God through Moses to take the mantle of the priestly office. But notice, never, ever, ever, ever do you see Aaron preaching. Ever thought about that?
Maybe they had too many who wanted to be preaching.
Well, no, they were all out of Egypt. They were all sinning horribly, and very few made it to the promised land. Remember that? I mean, there wasn't too many people preaching except Moses and him and maybe Joshua and Caleb. I was trying to think of Caleb, yeah. So there was a couple good guys out there, but no, Aaron never preached. Why? Because that's not part of the calling of the priest. Yeah, you take the mantle on that God gives you, and that's what you do. You don't go out from the mantle and do your own thing. Again, he never preached because preaching was not part of the priestly office. Just like King Uzziah, King Uzziah one day walks into the temple and wants to start burning incense, and the priest run in there and says, Uzziah, what are you doing, And they said, you can't burn incense, you're the king, He thought, well, I'm the king, I should be able to burn incense too, And basically they scolded him, and Uzziah got mad and cursed him, and they threw him out of the temple. And then what happened? Uzziah gets leprosy. God struck him with leprosy. Yeah, because he disobeyed the rule. You don't go out from your mantle that you've been given. Likewise, Jesus also did not take upon himself the glory of becoming the high priest, because it was proper for the Father to appoint the Son. Okay? So whenever he makes that statement, you are my son and today I become your father, whenever he made that statement, that was kind of the official appointment. Okay? Verse 5. Likewise, Jesus did glorify himself. Did glorify himself because. Wait, did I word that right? Woman came by virtue of it. Oh, okay. So yeah, because Jesus did choose to be the Son. He did choose to go through the trials and the temptations and the turmoil, and obviously he went through that. Um, I think the context on that day, I think that's kind of more of a figurative statement. What day are we talking about? Are we talking about the day he was born? Are we talking about the day he was arrested and went through all the trials? Are we talking about, when he was crucified? Are we talking about when he was resurrected? So I think that's more of a figurative expression for that period of time. Now I want you to look at this guy's face. Why did you wake me up? I was sleeping. Yeah, I mean, he looks really mean, doesn't he? That's supposed to be Melchizedek, right? So in verse 5, he says in another place, you are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. During the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with loud cries and tears to the one who could save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverent submission. Although he was a son, he learned obedience from what he suffered. And once made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him. And he was designated by God to be high priest in the order of Melchizedek. So actually, we're running out of time, but we'll go a little further. However, in verse 6, Jesus is not referred to as the high priest, if you look at that verse again, but rather he's referred to as the forever priest. A priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. What does forever mean? Yeah, eternal. He's the eternal priest, so he already was the eternal priest. He's just now a better eternal priest. Does that make sense? Jesus is the transcendent priest in that he stands alone without equal. Jesus is the high priest in respect to the Aaronic type of priesthood. Jesus is the high priest in respect to us because he gave us access to God and made us little priests. In fact, don't forget in Scripture we are called priests, aren't we? We're called in fact, we're not just priests, a holy priesthood. That's exactly right. So that's a good topic right there. We should do that one day. And Jesus is the eternal priest because he always had been, yet he fulfilled that role to a greater level, becoming man, temptation, and suffering. So I give him my vote. How about you? Oh, I even missed one. Okay, Jesus is the perfect priest because similarly to Melchizedek, Jesus holds the combined office of both priest and king. Yeah, because he's not just the priest, he's not just the king, he's the priest king. And you don't really see that unless you go way back in the Old Testament, usually among the pagans, right? Well, that's my point. Yeah, that's why his priesthood is perfect, because in a similar way to Melchizedek, he holds the combined office of priest and king.
Yeah, they call Mel the eternal king, but I think or eternal priest, but I think that was more considering earthly realm, not Jesus was forever, the eternal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a highly debated thing. And there's a lot of cults out there that have taken that and strewed it all up and try to feed us wrong information. Bill.
You call him anything you want to, but he's the Son of God and he's my Savior. And that's all I care. You can call him John or whatever. But, you get technical you want to, but in my simple faith, I call him Son of God.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all I need to know. He's my Savior.
Yeah.
It's simple, but that's what I base on.
Well, it's good to be simple, but you might be witnessing to somebody one day and they're going to ask you, well, how do you explain that? And we want to at least try to be able to explain it to people. Maybe we can, maybe we can't. But Paul also said very, very often that he reasoned with the people when he went there, when he went to the synagogue and they didn't agree with him or argued with him. He reasoned with them, which is where we get the word apologetics from, okay? And so he tried to teach them, he tried to, work with them. Maybe they were receptive, some were receptive, some were not. But yeah, so it's good to know this, right? Yeah. Did I see another hand up? No, maybe? No. All right. Okay, we have to stop.